Good morning. Hello to everyone and welcome to the Clore Leadership webinar on building resilience. Clore Leadership is a resource for leaders and leadership in the cultural and creative industries. And our webinar series is curated to explore some of the key issues that we know cultural leaders are grappling with in this time of COVID-19. Please do use your chat function to sign in and say hi. I see many of you are doing that, and that helps us to get a sense of who's joining us today. Resilience is a critical element. It's a critical thing that we need to find if we're going to find our way through this current crisis. But what does resilience look like when we're facing challenges for the first time? And how exactly do we build it? What can we learn from the experiences of our international colleagues? And can we apply any of those experiences to the current crisis that we are experiencing in our various contexts? So for this webinar, we're delighted to be joined by 3 Clore Fellows, learning from them how they have managed and navigated cultural leadership and cultural practice amidst different challenges and emergencies. The discussion will be chaired by creative director and producer Gregory Nash, who has a significant number of years of experience of cultural practice in different parts of the world, including most recently as creative director and director of arts for wider Europe at the British Council. A very quick note on logistics. Your microphones are muted so that we can manage the process as smoothly as possible for everyone. Please do use the chat function to say hi, to make some comments, and also to share any resources that you're picking up that you find useful. We are keen to have your questions, and there's a separate Q&A button which you'll see at the bottom of your screens. So please do put your questions in there, and then we'll be able to work our way through as many of those as we can. We're recording the webinar so that we can share this afterwards to the many people who aren't able to join us, and this will be published on our website, so you can also revisit if there are any elements that you want to catch up. So that's enough from me as an introduction. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over now to Gregory Nash. Gregory, welcome.
Hilary, thank you so much for that very nice welcome, and welcome everybody. I can see that we've got more than 90 people on the webinar, and just having a quick scan down as you sign in. We're in Bournemouth, we're in Newcastle, we're in London, we're in Wales, we're in Scotland. So fantastic to see so many people. Good morning to you wherever you are, and fantastic to see our 3 Clore International Fellows. And I'm very pleased to introduce Meggy Cheng, who is Director of Marketing at the Hong Kong Philharmonic, and Tumy Motsoatsoe, who is Head of Programs and Development at Business and the Arts in South Africa in Johannesburg, and also Refilwe Nkomo, who is an independent curator and artist and director of the Kaura Contemporary Art Gallery. Good morning, good early afternoon, it's great to see you. Meggy, I'm going to come to you first, if I may, and just, I mean, Hong Kong's been through it a little bit over the last couple of years, hasn't it? How's life there at the moment, and how are you coping individually?
Well, lucky, I'm healthy, both physically and psychologically, because we are the first few cities or places that actually been through the virus since end January. So basically, all the art venues are closed since then, and it's still not opened. So can you imagine 3 months of no arts venues and activities in Hong Kong? But fortunate enough, we are actually heading towards a recovery now. I think one learning that we have is that we experienced SARS like many years ago. That's why we have a very high awareness of what we have to do. So basically what I live with right now is 3 things: mask every day, hand sanitizer, and then wet napkin. So these are the 3 things I always carry along. And if you're not wearing mask, basically you will be like, look like that, you're a stranger. So some of the kids are not out for at least 3 months, no school, nothing happened, no sports, no karaoke, no salon, and even cinema are closed down since March, because we have another outbreak in March with all the returnees coming back from Europe and States. We are lucky that we have at least the last 5 days with 0 cases. So I think in my life here, I can share a bit more about how we are planning for the recovery, hopefully, in the coming few months' time. But still, it's actually important to be positive. Yeah, so that's it, my life here.
Yeah, we're going to talk a bit more about recovery later on, but what's happening with the orchestra, Meggy? Have the musicians been laid off? We have a system here in the UK called furlough, where staff members are stood down effectively, and a portion of their salary is paid. But what's happening to your orchestra?
I think the case in Hong Kong or in some Asian cities are quite different from US and Europe. I heard and I knew a lot of unfortunate news about orchestra members or artists has to be laid off. And lucky enough, because we are actually subsidized by the government in quite a substantial percentage, around 50%, compared to Europe or the States, which is relatively high. So most of our staff and musicians, we still keep our job. And the government also actually just released a relief fund to art group. So trying to help everyone to go through these tough times together, but still actually it's a big challenge to many freelance artists and also some members, of course, I'm sure, smaller organization, which is a very, very big uncertainty for them in the future moving ahead with all this social distancing policy and regulation in place. But yeah, luckily we still have a job, but obviously we have not been performing since January, which is, I think, is the longest moment in the last 40 years. And because we have no way to rehearse, so orchestra actually require a big space to rehearse together with 80 members. So basically we have no space to rehearse, and we just have to find other ways to keep the musicians' spirit up and to keep them like rehearse and practice and perform, but in a different way, virtually, or even in a smaller group ensemble. So this is what we have to do.
Correct. Thank you very much. Tumy, how is life in Johannesburg?
So life in Johannesburg is, I actually don't know. I can only maybe reflect on my own experience because I actually haven't been out into the city. But what I can say for South Africa is that it's very clear that depending on who you are, depending on where you are, life is completely different, and challenges are hitting us in a different way. As we know, South Africa is a deeply unequal society. So depending on where you're located geographically, you might have access to certain things or not have access to certain things, including information, including education. So I know my mother, who lives in a township not too far from the city that I live in, Johannesburg, she has been living her life normally. There hasn't really been strict movement. People have been going to malls, people have been going about their lives. I think it's when you look at the suburbs and the cities, that's where people are seeming to respect, I guess, the lockdown rules and regulations. So I think it's quite different for different people. I think for creatives, it's really, really impacting us very hard. I think a lot of people are, it's still in that shock state. Like, we knew that we'd need to incorporate or migrate into digital, but a lot of artists have really been caught wanting. A lot of people have been asking questions. What do we do now? Do we pause? Do we continue to create work? What type of work do we create? Who do we create the work for? How do we create this work? And one of the things that has become very, very clear is that those who do live in the margins, those who live in rural South Africa, have been removed from the radar. They're completely unable to participate in these Zoom meetings and the online engagement because they simply just are trying to survive. They're literally just trying to put food on the table. Individually, I'm at home. Today is the first time that I'm actually doing an online engagement in my flat. I usually do this from the car. An office that I never imagined would be my daily kind of go-to, because I have a 2-year-old and I don't have access to Wi-Fi. I didn't want to use my space as, an office, but I've had to obviously reimagine, rethink all of that. So it's navigating that, the personal and the professional. It's navigating gratitude for the gains and also oscillating between that and grief. grieving what life used to be, grieving what we hoped life would look like, and really just taking time to be kind to ourselves, because every single day has been about figuring the daily demands, the daily struggles, and really trying to see with the access to certain privileges that we have, how we can support others who don't. So I'll speak a little bit about that later in terms of what the organization is doing. But personally, I think it's rough.
Thank you, Tumy. And Refilwe, you're also in Johannesburg, and Tumy was talking there about the impact on individual artists and the independent sector. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about that, as well as telling us how you are.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Greg. And thank you everyone for showing up today. It's incredible to see how many people are here. So just a quick correction. I'm actually the director of an organization called VANZA, which is the Visual Arts Network of South Africa. And it's a development platform that provides knowledge materials and support for the visual arts community, but creative arts generally. So, I mean, I think I concur very much with what Tumy has said. Because of the deep inequalities that exist, even things like, the migration to virtual spaces and to online platforms has been really difficult for most people. Most people don't have access to either Wi-Fi or even a cell phone, right? And even if you do have both, it's really super expensive just to access something like a Zoom call, and then to try and maintain that for like an hour, it's just going to so it's quite complex to then say that, oh, okay, just move your exhibition online, and how to cultivate audiences around that if you've never had that before. So I think it's really challenging. There are a lot of opportunities that are manifesting from it. And I think that some of that solidarity work that's happening across the nation, but also internationally, is something that's quite remarkable, to think about how people are sharing resources and really thinking about, well, how do we come together now? Even though we are apart, what are the ways in which we can work together to ensure that we survive not only this moment, but we really think about what the future can look like, because the past and the so-called returning to normal wasn't particularly equitable or just for many people. So how do we move to a future that does embody all of the things that we want to see and is more inclusive, more just, and more equitable? Fantastic. So I'll leave it for that, but happy to discuss some more.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. There's a lot of discussion in the UK around what a return to normal would actually be, and whether this is an opportunity to actually completely rethink how we do things and how we interact with audiences and our communities. And for colleagues who've just joined us here on the webinar, I'm Gregory Nash, and I'm here with Meggy Cheng in Hong Kong, and Tumy Motsoatsoe and Refilwe in Nkomo in Johannesburg. We had a welcome from Hilary Carty at the top of the webinar. We just sort of had a bit of a check-in. We've got 90 people on the webinar at the moment. We just checked in with each of our guest speakers to find out how life is where they are and how they're coping individually. I'm going to come back to you, Meggy, if I may, and let's talk a little bit about the kind of measures that you and your team and the organisation are putting in place to maintain the programme and the communications with audiences during this time, and a little bit of thinking about resilience for the future.
Okay. Honestly, it's no way that we can maintain the program. I mean, the normal program, because as I said, we have all the venue closed down, as many places are, and we are uncertain when it's going to be open. So we just have to move everything online. And because I'm working on the marketing, so basically what we do immediately is that we work very closely with the programming team and the orchestra team to see what we can put in place quickly to put it on social media. And then we realized that there are actually huge possibilities that we can do around live streaming, about providing e-learning education material to kids who are all shut down at home and got nothing to do, but their parents are forcing them to learn things, like a tiger parent in Asia. So we actually create a lot of programs that involve musicians at their home. Which like many actually parts of the world, the artists, they just create things at home. And then actually it's quite interesting because you can see that people seems remote, very remotely living apart, But then through social media, they just become so intimate that you can enable another form of interaction of arts and creation to engender. And of course, there are also implications of, there are so many resources and content that is available now. What's next? I mean, will it actually encourage more people to enjoy performing arts online, but are they going to come back to the concert hall? How do we build confidence of our audience to really sit in a concert hall, listening to a performance with 2,000 people together? And also the question of how we actually protect the safety and health of our musicians, especially involving an orchestra where we play woodwind and brass. So there are already questions that how we can actually maintain the protection for our musicians and audience and all kinds of interactions that will take place in a live setting. But as I said, the debate is also around the digital and also the live performances, which is something that I think some of the art group are already discussing. And of course, there's also, we talk about the expression of hope and togetherness and support. And this is something that we actually also creating as a project in Hong Kong, that we try to create a program that include artists from different all walks of life, general public, to get involved into our creation project, which we are going to launch in 10 minutes in Hong Kong. The first time that we actually allow public to actually sing along together with the orchestra, which you can imagine it won't actually happen in real life, rarely. But at this special moment, we try to make it open. And as some people actually mentioned just now, to grieve for the loss, which personally, I also have a friend who actually died because of the virus. It's also a moment for us to grieve for the loss while we are actually anticipating for hope in the future. So there are a lot of discussion also about the live streaming possibilities, especially through technology, because we anticipate social distancing will last maybe at least end of this year, even though some venues are opened. Would the concert hall be open first? I don't think so, because the first to close, the last to open, basically. So I anticipate there will be like limitation on the seatings of the capacity. Say a 2,000 hall, we might be able only to seat 50%. And how you're gonna adjust your programming in order to fit into the box office loss that you anticipate. And so live streaming could actually be a possibility that we are actually also discussing with some technology companies and also telecom companies, see if we can actually enable more interactive interactions to take place. It's just exploring new ways of expressing arts and distributing arts. So this is what we are planning ahead.
Do you think, Meggy, you've talked about the audience returning to the concert hall, and it could be, as you say, that the concert hall isn't available for some time, or it might be a very different kind of space once it's available. Do you feel personally excited about the fact that you might now be connecting with and engaging people way beyond your concert hall, in numbers way beyond you would do with a normal season? Does that excite you, or is that a teeny bit scary?
Both. Scary because does it mean that people are not coming to the concert hall anymore and there won't be any live interaction? Because I think as a performing art person, we always prefer live interaction, and because we always see audience as part of the performances. But technology, live streaming, I mean, it also enables another kind of interaction. Maybe it spread wider. It involve more people without any like geographical limitations. But I would be very careful about how we approach technology and live streaming, because the stability in the reception and how can you balance between just not feeding content online, but you can keep the sense of spontaneity and responsiveness and interaction through technology. But live streaming, it's definitely something that anyway we will explore. And with the launch of 5G in Hong Kong and maybe in more parts of the world, it actually become a sponsorship possibility as well. Because I'm actually being approached by some telecom company who wants to use this opportunity to test launch their 5G. And since we lost some of the sponsorship, and most of them actually, maybe that could become another way of compensating our revenue and profits loss.
Emily Brennan, who is on the webinar with us, Meggy, is asking whether or not live performances could even be financially viable post-COVID, given there'll be social distancing measures. What do you think?
I think we just have, I still believe in live performance, and we just have to explore other ways to be creative in presenting the live performance. Say, for instance, what we are now doing instead of like just performing in the concert hall. Of course, acoustically, we always prefer a concert hall, especially with some sort of instruments. But we are also exploring doing smaller ensembles, and to do it in a smaller hall size, so that we can have a more balanced financially. Like if you have a bigger hall, you have a bigger cost to bear. So if a smaller hall, then you can have a more affordable account on that. And also exploring to perform outdoor space or half enclosed space. So these are all the things that we are currently exploring. So and also we are actually also exploring other smaller heritage sites, which we would never actually think about performing, because all the major venues closed down. So we have to be forced to explore other places. So heritage site is actually a very interesting place that we are thinking of creating stories with music and arts and the history of that area, which could be a possible way of like bringing profit or new product to the audience. So I still believe that it's viable, but it just have to be more creative in that sense.
Great, thank you, Meggy. Tumy, your work spans the world of the arts and business. How is the business community in South Africa responding to what's going on? Has there been a kind of upsurge in support for the arts, or is there a sense of everybody sort of minding their own house, and there's a kind of worry around that?
So the interesting thing is that Business and Arts South Africa, our role is to encourage mutually beneficial relationships between both sectors. And for the first kind of 10 years, we did that very well, building, appreciation of the sector, of the arts sector, in terms of, from a private sector perspective, them understanding the value of the arts, investing and being able to support the arts. Then we shifted a little bit towards equipping artists and the creative sector to really be bold enough and have the relevant skills to be able then to engage with the sector. So with COVID-19, what has happened is that the scale has literally tipped once again, where artists are desperately in need of business support. And we have recently launched an artist relief fund. And when I was looking at some of the applications, the demand is extremely high. And I really thought that businesses would, jump on the fund and really want to support. And there have been some who are really playing a major role in really assisting. But unfortunately, like I mentioned earlier, we have different problems in South Africa where just the physiological needs have become such a major priority. So I'm seeing a sense of direction towards helping people with just the basic needs. And I say basic, even though for me the arts is basic and essential, but obviously with an underappreciation or a lack of understanding of the value of arts, that has literally put us at the end, and sometimes not even on the map. So you're seeing businesses really prioritizing health, security, food, basic essentials, because millions of South Africans continue to experience high levels of poverty, right? And a lot of people don't even have access to homes. So businesses are supporting the arts, but it's quite a few. It's those who do understand the value of arts. It's those who have already built relationships with the arts sector. But what we're trying to do is really to drive a communication campaign that can really help people understand that while you're sitting at home, you're watching, you're experiencing art, you're using culture as an escape, as a method to access education, etc. So the demand is high. Artists are really trying to find different ways of supporting themselves and putting food on the table. But we're seeing that a lot more needs to be done in terms of explaining, in terms of really articulating the value of the arts, especially in a time like this, especially in a time of crisis. As we know, South Africa has gone through many a crisis, from colonization to apartheid, gender-based violence, and it has really been the music, the films, the poetry, the photography that has helped educate our citizens and really illuminate what is happening in our country and how people can really connect and support one another. So somehow it feels like there's still more to be done, and we're trying to do that. We also launched a #HeyFriend campaign, which really aimed to get as much diversity in terms of the voices who can really make that case for the arts. We've got academics, we've got artists, we've got, you know, a diversity of people coming to the party and saying there are different essentials services, and culture and art is one of them. It doesn't have to compete with health, it doesn't have to compete with security and safety, but it can really work in a holistic and systematic way. So I think it's different for different businesses, but those who get it, and we're trying to use those to really help send the message to even more businesses in South Africa and across the world, I guess.
And Tumy, are you seeing in your own organisation or in the arts more widely examples of really great leadership that you were admiring and taking note of?
Yes, I think that just my CEO, Ashraf Johardin, even before the COVID-19, because like I said, we are in a constant state of crisis, okay? So what he prioritized is just an access to wellness and counseling sessions. So we have somebody who comes into the office almost every Friday just to ensure that colleagues have a space to really voice out their challenges and get support with regards to that. And I think that a lot of leaders in our sector particularly have also been very deliberate in prioritizing that, because, you know, I've been thinking about the word resilience, thinking it's so easy to talk about it, but to actually experience it is a different thing. It's basic survival. And you can't have artists reflecting the times or holding up a critical mirror. Those people are traumatized. Those people are, you know, constantly also responding to some kind of trauma. And so it is important for us to be able to take care of their mental health. And I think for me that has really shifted how we as an organization is also able to respond, is also able to strategize in terms of how we're going to assist our stakeholders, work with our stakeholders, and really work hard in terms of cultivating these mutually beneficial relationships that prioritize at the center shared value, where communities that we are working with are given an opportunity to also have a say. Communities are even involved in all the decision making about what types of programs we are going to create during COVID and post-COVID. And Refilwe will attest to this. Before, I think a week before we announced the lockdown, we hosted a brainstorming session with different stakeholders. And it was the first time, I think, in a while where we actually understood that things are rapidly changing, but it's important to prioritize the people you have in mind, your beneficiaries in mind, not only thinking about their needs, but involving them and really prioritizing their needs and thinking about a holistic kind of development of the human instead of just, I think I speak about Maslow's hierarchy of needs quite a lot, but really thinking about that person who will be coming to your workshop, that person who will be coming to your show. Who are they? What hurdles do they need to overcome before they can even buy your offering or before they can even engage with your art? And I think that has become a priority for us. You see this with the President of South Africa also prioritizing the social kind of aspect of our people, you know, making sure that unemployed youth, unemployed individuals have access to some kind of a grant that can help them really just navigate the space as much as they can. So some of the lessons are really just thinking about the human, not just thinking of them as the artist or as the whatever. Just what does this person actually need? How can you incorporate their voice as you think about strategies to help them, as you think about strategies to help yourself as an organization as well. So that multiple kind of incorporation of different voices and prioritizing and putting the human first.
Tumy, thank you. That's very powerful. Refilwe, can you talk a little bit about, Tumy mentioned there about survival in times of crisis, and that South Africa has experienced lots of change and lots of crisis over its time. How are artists in the independent sector coping, and what are you doing in your role to support the needs of artists and to support them in looking towards the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is the role of sort of solidarity politics, right? And working across sectors. So what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of learnings that are coming out of like activism spaces and civil society, and really thinking about, well, what's happening in this sector and how can we mobilize as a creative and arts sector to use some of those practices and tools, and how is that applicable in our own sector, right? I'm seeing a lot of shared resources, and I'm seeing a lot of people coming together, because the reality is that whilst public institutions may survive because of government support, a lot of smaller institutions will not survive. They just don't have money for rent. And that's part of the advocacy work that we're doing, just in terms of like, how can we get rental holidays? How can we get and ensure that people don't have to pay off loans during this period of lockdown, where they literally do not have audiences, no one's coming to buy the art, so they literally have no money to even pay staff. So if those organizations go, that means that there's going to be this huge sector of independent art that doesn't exist, and a huge sector of independent artists who are working creatively as freelancers who have to move into other sectors just to survive. So it means that a lot of people who are already on the periphery and already just sort of thinking about like, how do I get past like May and pay my rent for May, will literally not be artists come this time next year. They just won't be able to support themselves and their families. So I think there's a lot of advocacy work that needs to happen, and a lot of education for artists as well, to say that this is a priority. Ensuring that your labor rights are entrenched is a priority, on top of just creating your own work and being an artist. So I think it's about how to hold those dualities and work with the different sectors. So at Vanza, what we're doing is, so as an NGO, a non-governmental organization, we're working closely with government and the rest of the creative community to advise government on what can happen in the short term, medium term, and long term, and how to open up the industry in a way that people can still monetize their practice, and we don't have to wait until, the end of lockdown or the moment when we do have a vaccine to really start seeing artists and theaters opening up and artists working again. So what is it that can be done in the short term and medium term to ensure that there is sustainability and that the industry itself becomes resilient? And I mean, I will say that I think that artists are deeply resilient individuals. Like, they were the first ones on social media putting up poetry posts, putting up like workshops, dancing, having theater for one, theater for many. So we are the first ones there, and we are the ones who are getting our communities through these lockdowns. So I think that there's also education that needs to be done in terms of publics, and really ensuring that as we, hold all of these other needs like shelter, and how do we also hold the arts and look at ourselves, as Tumy says, as holistic human beings who are cultivated and nourished by our creative capacity and by our capacity to imagine ourselves beyond this moment and to imagine a future and reimagine and re-engineer our society in such a way that we can have an equitable future for all. And I think it's really artists who can do that work of creating and thinking about something that we've never experienced before, but that we know is possible. So I'm excited at the possibility, but to be honest, I'm also quite scared about, who will get left out, who will be left behind. So I think it's really imperative that those who do have a seat at the table, those who do have voices, those who are in leadership positions, to really step up. And what does that look like, and what does it mean? And I'm really thankful for spaces like Clore. I'm thankful for the communities that I exist within, for holding space for the grief, for holding space for the fatigue, and and really thinking about, well, you know, how can we work together? What are the tools and resources that we do have? How do we mobilize and come together? And how do we also feed ourselves just as individuals, and ensure that we ourselves are healthy and okay? Organizationally, I'll just say quick things, sorry, I'm going on. But organizationally, we've developed a resource list, which I think a number of organizations have done as well, just so that artists can be able to access different funding and mental health resources as well. We're developing a toolkit as well as sort of like short little podcasts to really help with mental health as well, because it's a glaring issue that this crisis has illuminated, but you know, a lot of the issues were already there. A lot of cracks were already in the system. So I think now is a point for us to think about, well, how do we do this work with the urgency that this moment requires, but with the foresight to think about what does it look like in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time? Yeah, and that's the work that needs to be done.
We've got a question, Refilwe, from Marina Blore, who's in Blackpool, about what are you suggesting to government? So in this thinking and with artists and organisations coming together and being strategic, are there some formal structures, strategies, approaches that are being made to the South African government?
Yeah, so the government had released 150 million rand for artists, for the creative sector and sports. However, that's not enough. It wasn't sufficient at all. It equals about 6.7 million pounds for the whole of South Africa. So what's happening now is that there's a 500 billion rand economic relief fund for all sectors. But often what happens and what we see is that the creative sector isn't included. So we need to really come together as a creative sector, and that's a lot of the meetings that are happening in the background, to advocate for ourselves. So a lot of the things that we are advocating for are around, on the basic immediate term, a relief for so holiday payments on rent, holiday payments on loans, and those sort of like monthly expenses. What we're also advocating for is a basic income grant, so to allow for artists to at least have basic income. So these are full-time artists who are working and can't perform, they can't, you know, be in spaces, they can't sell their work right now. So that's what we're advocating for in the short term. In the medium term, because we have a phased approach to how we get the economy back and running, and artists are only going to emerge at the end of that approach, right? Theatres, galleries are only opening right at the end. We're looking to government to say, look, let's not think of the arts as an event space, right? There's so much that happens before the event takes place and even afterwards. There's researchers, there's educators, there's critics, there's so many people who also support the artistic space, whether they transport artwork or they're engineers or whatever the case may be. So how do we ensure that everybody who is active in the creative sector is able to work in some way or form? Is that about developing platforms that monetize artists' work? Is it about, you know, creating spaces and ensuring that everybody has access to Wi-Fi? So those are some of the things that we are thinking about. But also I think that a lot of the solutions are coming from artists themselves, and they will come from the creative sector. And I'm not sure we're really seeing that now, because we are in a moment of grief, and I think it's important to sort of hold what collective grief means and collective change management, right? Of which grief is a part of that. How do we overcome our grief to get to that point where we're innovating and really thinking about, well, actually, what is the opportunity here? And from that point, I think we're going to start to see a lot of solutions coming from rural communities, because people are going to say, well, actually, I don't need to be in an urban center, right? How are rural communities going to be developed? How are people going to change their work and structure and build audiences that are not only local, but international as well? Yeah. So that's some of the work that we're doing, but really thinking.
I'm going to pick up on some of those points about the future and artists and communities contributing to the conversation, Refilwe. Thank you. But Tumy, we've got a question from Guy Noble. Sorry, Guy, I'm not sure where you are, forgive me. But Guy is asking, what role do you see organisations have in recognising the grief and the loss that you and Refilwe have both spoken about? And is there a moment of commemoration in this process?
I think that it's still going to take a while. I think, like I said, we've only been in the lockdown for about 5 weeks now, and it's expected that in South Africa we'll reach our peak in September. So I think that the past 5 weeks have just literally been about, oh, okay, what has just happened and how are we going to organize? I know that there are a lot of artists who have really been making suggestions and, as Refilwe is saying, proposals around how do we then take time to actually commemorate, mourn even, or even just take time to process what is happening. There are artists who have, proposed songs, like we always do in South Africa. But I think that compared to other crises, this one has hit us in a very deep way, because we, as artists, we were able then to meet at the community art centers or in the theaters to then, find a place where we can do that collectively. And so what has become very difficult is that to be able to then connect all of us to figure out what that commemoration looks like, or what that community engagement or community coming together looks like, is very difficult, because like we've articulated earlier, I may not necessarily have access to the email. I may not necessarily have access to the equipment to be able to source ideas and to even share my ideas. So I think we're still, for me, I feel like we're still in that processing stage. And I'm hoping that once we get to June, July, when schools have figured out what is the best model, when unemployed young people have figured out how to just navigate this crisis, how women are able to even think about what gender-based violence looks like for them right now. I think once we figured out those kinds of shocks to our system, then we can start to think about what does that commemoration look like? What does that song sound like? Who is included and who is not included? What language are we going to sing that song in? Who's going to be listening to that song? And I think what is also exciting that Refilwe is highlighting is that, I speak about this idea of prosumerism. I don't know who is the author, but consumers and producers have become one. Audiences and creators have become one. So I look forward to that involvement of citizens rather than artists just doing it on their own. I look forward to numerous South Africans coming together to take that time to mourn together, and one day eventually to then share or think about what the future could look like for all of us. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Meggy, I'm going to ask you to take us into the future a little bit and to pick up on some of the themes from Refilwe and Tumy around co-creation, around the sense that artists and communities and prosumers. But just before you do that, we've got a question from Felix Lowe at the South Bank Symphonia. You mentioned you've moved your programming activity online. How is the cost being covered? Artists and musicians are still having to be paid, and is this still work for them? I think you did touch on this earlier, but you might want to just elaborate on it a little bit.
Yes, as I mentioned just now, the Hong Kong Philharmonic is a government subsidized art organization. So lucky enough, we still survive, and that's why actually we have to actually produce content online. And the musician, they are not paid to do these things online, so they are obligated somehow to actually produce content for us to keep performing and also keep their creativity spirit up. So this is how we actually manage the content creation. And of course, there are extra budget and resources and knowledge that we have to acquire for doing all these technology interaction and content creation, which is somehow actually very exciting for me and my team, because usually we have to perform in concert hall, and we always perform concert hall the usual way, the usual practices. But with all this lockdown and this virtual orchestra, virtual ensemble, and of course also the co-creation process, where we actually see musicians, they actually voluntarily create some programs and interesting themes around music and meditation, music and wellness. on their own, and they want to submit it to us. And we are actually very happy to also publish all this content on the orchestra platform. And we also see musicians of our own musicians, they try to approach other musicians in other orchestra, try to create new musical journey of themselves. And actually you realize that many musicians, they actually is a very good editor as well themselves. So it's very interesting that you create interesting dialogue with musicians, and it becomes actually strangely closer than before, actually, with this lockdown, usually. And someone just touched on how we change the relationship with our stakeholders. Interestingly, as a marketer, we have always been like challenged by establishing a partnership with commercial entity and all that. But with this stage of the city, actually it makes us rethink about how we manage the relationship with not just musicians, but also our stakeholders, government, the press in Hong Kong, and also some commercial partners that we have. It seems to make all the conversation a lot easier because people are more willing to collaborate, and without actually try to put numbers in the conversation first. They want to try to see what we can do together, what we can explore, and new ways of surviving together. Without talking money first, which is actually very, very emotional for me. And also I want to bring about the idea of some people actually say that this whole pandemic is also an anti-globalization movement because every place is locked down. So you can only stay in one place. And interestingly, we find more people actually doing work that we involve local artists, because you can't actually have other foreign artists flying in. So you have to force to actually collaborate, and there are actually more interesting focus that we actually give to local artists and local values or local cultural habit and heritage. Suddenly we want to actually do more with the local partners.
Meggy, this chimes a lot with conversations that are happening in the UK. Take us forward into the future a little bit. Will the leadership of the Philharmonic grasp this opportunity to connect more with the communities of Hong Kong and the territories? And will the nature of the organization, the program and the organization change as a result of it?
I would say the changes in the future is that I think it's a mindset change most of the time. And as a classical music art group, I would say we have always been like working quite constantly based on what we have accumulated in the past and what has been successful in the past, and we have been quite stabilized as an organization. But after this pandemic, we just have to be really, really flexible. And I have to say, we always try to not think about the risk. Because we think that, oh, we already know what we have and we know how strong we are. But the thing is, with this whole thing, it just collapsed everyone. And it's time for us to actually realize that there are things that are out of our control. And there are fear, but we acknowledge the fear and we acknowledge that we are fragile, and then we plan for the risk. So we actually, right now, we are planning for the new season, which is supposed to launch in September. But the thing is, we don't know whether it's going to happen because we don't know whether the hall is open. So what we plan is that we are already thinking of, if the hall is not open, then everything has to go online, live streaming. So how are we going to make it happen? How are we still going to celebrate this performing arts, music sharing process without a live performance audience? So I have to say we have some limitation because we are a big group of orchestra. And we don't own a venue in Hong Kong. I mean, this is one thing. Most of the art group in elsewhere, maybe they own a venue. So you can keep performing with a live streaming, but we don't own it. So while we plan for live streaming, but we don't have a venue, so how are we going to perform and launch the season? So this is still something that we are still figuring out. But as I said, have to be more flexible, plan for the risk. And I think we also have to manage also as well the financial loss. and what we have to compromise on this sense, and while we actually gain more from other means of a creative process. So we also shift quite a lot of focus to focus on education and doing more free performance in communities where the safety and also the venue are possible, and more free content, e-learning, music promotion content that we actually collaborate with universities as well, and also other welfare groups, so that we can also provide music, but not just classical music, but ties in with other social or psychological topics like wellness. Music and wellness is also something that we are exploring as a big territory, as we also foresee that after all these outbreak, elderly isolation, over addiction of youth on social or digital content, some possibilities or problems already arise. So we are trying to do things around that as well. So,
thank you. And Tumy, in a country where Wi-Fi coverage is not a given and people do not necessarily have access to online content, what's the future for cultural organisations in South Africa, do you think?
I think it depends on what the cultural organization aims to do. But I think, like Refilwe mentioned, and I think what Meggy also touched on, is this idea that, you know, people have access to knowledge, people have access to platforms where they can source this kind of training and education. So for an organization like BASA that does skills and education kind of development programs, we're going to really need to think about our relevance and whether, you know, creatives actually need us if they are experts of their own experiences. I think many cultural organizations are also going to need to really think about how they then work with individuals in these margins, not only to facilitate kind of access to resources, but really to just support at a distance, because these people are creating work that makes sense to them. Rural communities know what they need, what they like. They have ecosystems that exist for them. I think it would just be about supporting that and not necessarily facilitating anything. So really building township economies, local economies that can then play into the bigger economy. I think cultural organizations like theaters, gallery spaces will really need to dig deep in terms of what they are offering, what makes them stand out. As we mentioned, that a lot of people might still be fearful of physically going to the space, and if they're able to just order it online or be able to engage with culture online, why must they still exist? And I think currently we are grieving that kind of social interaction, and I think we will continue to grieve it for a long time. I think we need to also be okay in the grieving or in the process of dealing with this. We need to be okay with the fact that life will not be the same, but also we may put in place systems and processes that may only work for the future generations, where we might not necessarily be a part of. And we've seen this with many crises in our country, where, for example, with the apartheid era, we know that a lot of people who fought in the war, who fought in those streets, are not necessarily enjoying the freedom right now. So we are putting in place systems that may only benefit future creatives, future citizens, and we need to be okay with that. We need to be okay with the fact that we might also build systems that may never work, that may be completely irrelevant. So to even think of a long term for me is slightly overwhelming. I think short term and medium term is more manageable. And I think we need to think about relevance. Who are you creating for? Why are you creating that? And what are you hoping to achieve? Why do you think the person that you're creating for can't create that for him or herself? So it's really about, like digging deep and asking yourself, why must you exist? Why must your organization exist? And if it does exist, how are you going to communicate and make sure that the value of its existence is appreciated? I think
Tumy, I'm going to ask you to lead us off on our final question. Amazingly, we're almost out of time, and I want to leave a few minutes for Hilary just to close. We've got a very good question from Valerie Sinmoe here. A lot of the challenges that you are all describing are very similar to what we have in the UK. How can we better connect internationally to share ideas and practice and lobby at an international level? Your Clore International Fellows, give us some steers for the future of international collaboration. I'll come to each of you in turn. Tumy, if you'd start us.
Yeah, I think that we should continue these networks. I've really enjoyed Culture Watch that also organized one of the biggest Zoom meetings that I have ever been a part of. And what I really enjoyed is just the incorporation of different languages, different people, different sectors. And I think if we continue in that way, we will really achieve a lot. So that cross-sectoral, that cross-diversity engagement for me will be the most important way to move forward, because we know that culture is important, but we also need to know and learn from other sectors. So that diversification for me will be important, diversification of the kinds of platforms we are using to connect with each other, and the diversification of the subject areas and subject matters that we are tackling, because we don't exist in silos. And I think we're starting to understand that quite clearly because of this crisis. So cross-pollination, multi-pronged approaches, partnerships, diversification, and constant kind of checking in what is happening elsewhere, and what can I learn and what can I contribute. So definitely Clore is leading in that way, because here we are, international students, international fellows, connecting with different people across the globe. And I know that Chevening, for example, has been leading on that as well. We have not been able to do physical kind of networking events, but we are doing that online, and it is really, really working. It's interesting to hear what is happening in the health sector, what innovation is happening in engineering, and incorporating lessons and insights from all those other sectors into the creative sector.
Tumy, thank you. Meggy, just in 1 minute, give us a steer about future of international collaboration.
Anytime. I mean, I agree totally with Tumy said. And Hong Kong has always been like friend with everyone, and we are happy to share anything that we have been through. And of course, I would also love to know what's not working on the practical sense, so that we know that, oh, just don't spend time on that. So focus on the others. So I mean, it's always good to open to share case that is not working, and that's so that we learn from each other. And I also want to think about one thing is always don't forget about not just a fellow, but your mentor. Because I actually also have been frequently in touch with my mentors. And as a leader that come through with so much experience, they have given me a lot of support, comfort, and also from the commercial background. Actually, I learned a lot. So if we can maybe include some of the mentors that would be willing to help and to have conversation with us, I think that would be helpful.
Meggy, thank you. And Refilwe, for you.
Yeah, I think we're creating new language. We're creating a new language of solidarity. We're creating a new language of intergenerational, intercontinental dialogue, and what it means for us to be together, particularly when we can't physically be together. What it means for me to create work here and to sustain myself and be in competition and not be in competition with someone online, right? So I think that we need new language. Creatives are best positioned to create what that new language is, and a future that is inclusive, that is just, that is for all of us. And I'm excited to see what that looks like, and we can all be a part of it.
Refilwe, Nkomo, Meggy, Cheng, and Tumy Motsoatsoe, it's been an absolute pleasure to be in this conversation with you, and thank you for your sharing and for your insights. It's been fantastic, and we've had upwards of 107 people online with you, so thank you so much. Back to you, Hilary.
Oh, thank you so much to all the panelists and to Gregory Nash for chairing. It's really stimulating to hear those perspectives. You've mentioned the value of sharing, the value of connecting, the value of learning from all of our experiences and our different contexts as well. So one of the things that I've taken from this is just how much there are similarities in our experiences, in our cultural experiences, even though we're in different parts of the world. I would absolutely encourage you to connect across art forms, across geographical spaces, because there's value in those lessons that we can gather from each of our experiences. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're very much looking forward to keeping these connections alive. Goodbye from Clore Leadership. Thank you very much to our panelists.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.